And we're back. It's now we're going to look at in this video. I'm going to cover some aspects of joints part one that will be on our test, and so we kind of see where we're going to pick up. Some of the stuff I won't talk about, but it doesn't mean it's not going to be on the test. I just want to go over some of these things because people can struggle with it a little bit. But so one thing that we've seen in lab and people have asked questions about already is muscle attachment sites. And so there's an origin, which is where muscle is going to attach to something. And this is like its anchor point, right? So it's where this bone is, wherever this is anchored to, is not going to move. And so if you have an origin for a muscle and you're looking at that to your lab manual, that's a spot that's not going to move that bone. However, the insertion is the one that will move. And so when you have an origin and an insertion, right? And so that's what we're looking at here for the biceps. It originates up here and inserts down here. So the bone that's going to move is this. And so when this muscle contracts, it shortens and gets smaller. And that's going to cause this thing to pull up, right? And so you go from out and then go all the way in. That's origin, insertion. The insertion moves towards the origin behind it. And so if you can remember that, that makes it a lot easier sometimes when you're studying. Because if you just think about, okay, I know what this muscle does. All right. So where would that kind of align roughly on the body? And it can make it do a whole lot easier. So that's why I think you should always tie in, actions with like the locations and things on the bone. So just memorize these things as individual units, piece it all together, and it makes it make a whole lot more sense. But these movements occur along our plane. So going way back to chapter one, the frontal, sagittal, and transverse planes, that's how movement occurs. And so there's ways to look at some of these joints and some of the motions that they have. So we'll look at some of these different movements. And so you can have, there's a wide variety of synovial joints. It's most of the joints you think about in the body, honestly, like your fingers, arms, knee, elbow, shoulders, jaw, all that stuff is synovial. But you have the non-axial movements where they just kind of slip. You have a uniaxial or move along one of those planes. So either the transverse, the sagittal, or the frontal. You can have biaxial where they move in two planes, or multiaxial, move around all three planes. And so that's the one that's a little more limited in action. And so you should have an idea for the different types that's later on in the notes about kind of which ones allow for which area. Those. And there's also different types of motions and movements, gliding, angular, and rotation. So we're going to go through these a little bit. So there's a nice little figure that kind of sums them all up, I think, pretty well. So it gives you examples of different joints and what type they are and what type of movements they allow for. So you can see the ball and socket is the only one with multi-axial. And the ball and socket is your shoulder and your leg, your hip. Then you have like the saddle joints, which do biaxial. So you got things like fingers and things, or the thumb, really. Then the actual fingers is the condylar. So they're both biaxial though, so they kind of do some of the same things, which is abduction and adduction, and then flexion and extensions. You get rotations with the pivots, your arm, your forearm, examples of that. And then like the elbow is a hinge, pretty classic for that one. And then with these, the planes for your hands. So these wrist bones kind of go through in your ankle too. They just kind of glide with each other. All right, so let's look at some of these motions and what they do. I think when you're looking through these things, I think it makes a lot of sense to just like do the motions. I always recommend people do that in class, but then nobody does it because like you're in a class of other people and you're like, hey, that was weirdo. So people don't really tend to do it, but you should. It really makes this thing make a whole lot more sense. So even if you're actually watching the video, again, I appreciate it. I don't tend to do these because people don't tend to watch them, but if you are, I appreciate it and do the motions along with it. And starting off, nice little wave. Nice little gliding action happening here. So boom, get a little gliding in. And so that's the gliding example. The flex motions are like the angular stuff. So you're increasing the angle between bones. This occurs along the sagittal plane, can anyway. And so you can see like flexion, extension, kind of what's happening there. And so flexion will increase the angle of the joint. That's a weird way to describe it. I think it's maybe easier to think about it in terms of flexion. The insertion is closer to the origin. That's probably not easier. But it's like if you're looking at like the picture down here, so extension, it's flat. So the angle of this joint is here, and now it's like a 180 degree. Meanwhile, it's a smaller angle here because it's moved up. So now the angle is only 90 degrees. And so what's going to make this kind of difficult is you have to focus on that one particular joint. A lot of our movements involve many different of these things happening at the same time. You can have flexions and extensions happening up together. And so that's why you have to focus on that one specific joint. And so a hyperextension is something that kind of goes beyond the anatomical position. And so remember, anatomical position is just like that one set kind of pose thing. And then like a hyperextended elbow is when your elbow starts flat and kind of goes further down, right? The way you're not supposed to go. It's exceeding the limits of anatomical position. And so here's a volunteer from the textbook doing these motions. So you got the flexions, and so this is like a normal head movement. And so this is one of the most common movements by these synovial joints along this plane, along this system here. These angle sorts of things. So if you're looking down, looking up at the sky, holding your head up is just regular extension, pretty much. Flexion, looking down. And so like your hands, flex, extend for the wrist. And so tons of stuff. And here's one showing like the actual trunk of the body. You bow down, you lean back, standing up, like what those are. And so just doing some practicing. So here's some more. It's just the actual shoulder joint, right? You can flex that one. That was a little tougher to think about, like extension and flexions. But extension's more like a default. Flexion, the shoulder goes forward. Extension, it goes backwards. With kicking or like with your legs, right? So a flexion, if you play soccer or something, you're getting ready to, drill that ball. So you flex, you pull the leg back, then you extend and then hyperextend potentially, or you extend your foot, but then you move this thing up. So this joint up, the ball and socket. And so the whole leg kind of gets into the whole operation and does the actual movements there. And so I think it's really kind of fun to look at different scenes of movies or TV shows, or even like your own things that you do. And I think about what movements are you doing? So like, during this famous scene of The Matrix, what is happening? What all joint movements is Keanu Reeves doing in this shot? And so you can see he's leaning back, right, with this joint here. So it's an extension. Meanwhile, the knees are flexed for sure. But then while this here looks like it might be actually flexed as well, because that foot's kind of leaning forward a bit. So we got flex, flex, extend on the back. Head looks to be extending a bit as it's leaning back. And then let the shoulder rut's going backwards. So that's, an extension sort of thing. The arms are flexed a bit. So it's kind of fun just to practice. Another type of you can have of these of angular movements is the abductions and adductions. So these are a little more on the frontal plane of action, and it's all about how you move towards the midline of the area. That's kind of weird. But I think the easiest way to think about it is with your arms and your hands. And so if you kind of stand in place and like flap like a bird, that's showing these motions. So adduction is when your arms are by your side. Abduction is going up. And so the way I always kind of think about it is like your arms are going to go up if you're getting abducted by aliens, right? So you're getting abducted, you're getting, sucked into space. That's what it always looks like in shows and TV. They wouldn't lie. And so you can kind of sucked up in that way. So that's, getting abducted on the abductions, your arms go up. And on your hands, same deal. So if you're trying to show out, boom, 5, that's abduction. And then adduction, everything's together. So, get a nice solid high 5, boom, adduction. Hey, how many, drinks do you want? Boom, 4. You can also do circumduction, which I always remember from school. They always had to do these little rotation things like this. Kind of rotating your arm steadily. It's kind of like that. So this little move, just a circumduction. You can see that here. You can also rotate stuff. And so it's moving away or towards the midline or the midline of the body. And so lateral, it's going away. Medial, it's facing in. So remember our directional terms. That makes a lot of sense. And so here's some examples there. So you rotate your head to say, yay or nay. You can also do a lateral rotation with your leg. So it's always like, put your right foot in, put your right foot out, and like shake it all about or something like that. Hokey pokey thing. I don't really know the exact words, but that always reminds me of this, put your out, foot in, foot out, foot in sort of thing. A lot of great potential for some dance trends off of this. So think about, just exploring and doom scrolling through TikToks, right? And just seeing these kids doing this dancing. Think about what movements they're doing, or maybe even make an educational one, off of that. So make a whole little jam with a little beat. And, with some words here, do the flexion, not the hustle, do the flexion. Hustle's old, flexion's the new one. Don't do that. Next up, we have supination and pronation. These are my favorites. And also dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. These names sound kind of scary, all right, but hang with me. So for supination, that's when the palms will face anterior. So in anatomical position and your palms are out, like kind of like that, that's this one. I think in like volleyball, sometimes you have to hit it up like this, that kind of motion. You probably can't see me. Damn. But so like, kind of like that little motion. And so that can happen. And then the pronation is when the palms face posteriorly. And so that's like on this way. And so I always remember this, like if you're dribbling a basketball, right, you're a real pro. And so you have your hand in pronation and you're dribbling the basketball. Meanwhile, if you're trying to like play like hand hacky sack, right, trying to keep something lifted up in the air, you keep doing this little motion. Pizza lifting. If you like to do pizza twirls, right, and flip that thing up, right, that's supination. And so what's cool is there's muscles we'll see in lab after fall break, the supinator and the pronator teres that rotate and cause these motions. So it causes the movement of the hand to do that sort of thing. And then dorsiflexion and plantar flexion is with the foot. And so dorsiflexion is when you bend your foot up towards your shin. So you kind of like lift your toes up, kind of bend the whole foot up. And then plantar flexion is when you plant, all right? So if you stand on the tippy toes, try and reach something on the top counter. I remember dorsiflexion because it looks like dorsey, which is like dorsal fin to me. So it makes me think like I'm turning my foot into a shark fin or a dolphin fin. That's what it kind of reminds me of. So I remember that. And then there's the pronation, supination. So this is supination, that's pronation. And like I feel like, when your hands are out like this, like, sup, what's up? Just saying, hey, when it's pro time, boom, got to flip that thing over. Do the flip. Gotta make the sound effect. Oh, this is a count. Here's our dorsiflexion. Here's our plantar flexion. Nice. For some of these, though, I should tell you, you may have to recognize some of these on the test. So I'll either describe a motion or show you a picture of motion, and you have to tell me what it is. So do ready yourself for that. There's a homework you'll have to do for 8.1 here, and it should have ample amounts of practice on that concept. All right. So do not ignore that stuff. I think it's pretty easy. So don't mess up and forget about it. But here's that dorsal fin action happening on the dorsiflexion. Boom, pop that thing. You can also do some inversion, eversions of the foot. And so sometimes you get like, hey, did I just step in something? All right, with the shoe, got to, twist the foot over a bit. That's what this is. So it's inversion. Eversion's a lot harder to do, but I feel like if you're do a little eversion on the foot, you're probably gonna sprain an ankle. So be careful, especially if you're outside doing it. But so this is somebody who's taught an elephant. So this is a big thing in captivity elephants. Their feet skin grow really fast. And so trainers have to train them to invert their foot to face it medially. So the keepers can go in there and just like grind off the extra skin cells. Otherwise, it causes them problems. And another motion is the protraction and retraction. This is mainly thought about with the mandible. So when you like jut the jaw out some, it's protracting. So I can't see. Then retraction, you pull that sucker back in. Sure, that motion. I got another picture coming up. There's inversion, eversion. There's the protraction, retraction sort of thing. So jut the jaw out versus not. There's also the elevation and depression of the mandible. And so elevate, closes, depression lowers it. So you do elevation, depression every time you chew. That's what happens. And so, but that's also other parts of the body too. You can elevate the shoulders, lift them up. Like, I don't know. What's the answer to this question? I don't know. So we say a lot in lab, in class, and in the test. Depression lowers it down. And that's kind of easy to remember, right? I think that's pretty obvious. Usually, when depression may strike, you probably don't feel your best when you have a moment like that. So, tap into that. Elevator, the damn thing takes you up, right? So you can go down on an elevator, okay, but usually think about it going up. So elevator, going up. And then thumb opposition is where you take the fingers and just oppose them to the thumbs. It's just kind of a cool motion. But anytime you like grab something, right, you're using opposition. There's elevation, depression, there's oppositions. And now, one thing you should definitely do, I think if you're looking for some inspiration, go to and watch the very legendary performance by the B-girl, Ray Gunn, shown here. So as a breaker from the Olympics, did a variety of interesting dance moves, but also they're at a pace kind of slow enough. You can see everything. So find a clips on the YouTubes about it. I'll see if I can find one and share it. And see if you can think about like during the moves, what was happening. So what's happening to these joints? And so in the case here, the kangaroo kick, a thing that actually happened. You can see a few things happening. So it looks like the body is staying relatively flat. So it looks like this part here will be extended, maybe hyperextension. The head looks leaned forward a bit. So that's going to be a flexion for the head. And then the elbow joint will be flexed. That's going in. The wrist also flexed as it's going down. So flex, flex. And then the overall arms themselves are kind of lifted up. So that should be like another flexion of some kind. Maybe even a little bit of elevation it looks like happening, for that little thing. It'll lift it up, T-Rex style. So elevate that thing. And it kind of looks like to me, jaws jutting out a little bit. So I'd say we got a little protraction going on there. Yeah. And then the foot looks like some dorsiflexion is happening. Like it's a little bit of curving happening, but also a little bit of like that lateral rotation too of the leg is also seems to be taking place. Flexion for sure here. And then this is going up. So that leg follows the same kind of motions of the arm. So a little bit of flexion there. Meanwhile, this one looks to be more of an extended thing where it's kind of going back, but then the knee itself is flexing, but the hip is extending. And this looks to be going out a little laterally as well, but also a little bit of flexion down here in the ankle. So you're not going to do anything that level of depth on the test, okay? But if you can do that, it's practice, and it's really easy to showcase and just demonstrate, routine knowledge. So it's not bad. And then last, there's different categories of these different joints. Look over these, kind of know some examples of which ones are which. So what's a good ball and socket, a condylar, a pivot, and recognize what those may be. There's a lot of figures in here. I'm not going to necessarily show you these and go, hey, what is this thing? I'm not really going for that. But also think about some of the different motions, flexion and extension, adductions. Which joints is that associated with? Which, this is a biaxial, what planes, what motions is it allowing for? So that sort of stuff is what you should kind of practice on. But I think that might actually do it now for the lecture videos. I think they might do it in. So if you watched them, I appreciate it. And if you didn't, that's fine too. It was an adorable time. I don't know how long this will be. I hope reasonable. My apologies talking too much. I want to thank our special guest. We got the pig skeleton. My dog's getting restless, so they expect to come in here and start some shit. We got our little penguin here. Penguin. I got my buddy Throg, who's getting increasingly antsy, wanting to do something. We also had special guest Bloodstorm, Storm herself. And then another one we didn't see, Dracula. Another figure that I got in more recent. I got 3 that are supposed to come in today, which I hope happens because I'd like to have them. Otherwise, it'll be a little bit, I think, until we get deliveries based off the weather I'm seeing. It's an unfortunate time for Prime Day to be hitting. A lot of sales this week. Meanwhile, I'm just hoping I'll have power during that time. But yeah, I'm gonna have some other videos, more fun stuff. But I think that's it for now. So see you when I see you.